Here's something scholars rarely mention. The Norse people conquered winters so brutal they would kill modern humans in hours without firewood, electricity, or anything we'd recognize as survival gear. When endless night blankets the northern lands and temperatures plummet beyond imagination, we simply flip switches for warmth and illumination. But picture existing in an era devoid of power grids, heating systems, or adequate timber supplies. This defined life for medieval Scandinavians who didn't merely endure, they dominated conditions we'd classify as lethal. They refused to battle winter's fury. Instead, they merged with it, applying wisdom inherited across countless generations. Their shelters, garments, and routines were refined through trial for a singular mission, conquering darkness and freezing air. This represented a silent, relentless struggle where brilliance mattered more than blades. Stay with me to discover how longhouse design transformed human breath into thermal energy, and why basic wool outperformed today's advanced synthetic materials. What if everything you've heard about Norse dwellings was completely mistaken? We typically imagine the longhouse as merely crude construction. Actually, it functioned as an intricate social and mental stronghold, defending against cold and the insanity brought by perpetual darkness. The entire clan, from leaders to laborers, assembled inside this massive rectangular building. Brother.
The raids to the east were fruitful this season. We have enough wool to last the winter.
That is good news.
Collective body warmth within confined quarters dramatically raised ambient temperature. Survival wasn't fought outside, but won inside the human spirit. Activity never ceased, even during midnight hours. Males carved timber and maintained tools and armaments, while females spun thread and woven cloth. This perpetual motion generated supplementary heat, while preventing people from succumbing to depression caused by eternal gloom. I promise that Bear dwarfed this entire structure. The dwelling wasn't simply protection, it became the universe's center for occupants throughout extended winter spans. Here legends were recited, information exchanged, deals negotiated, and fellowship cultivated. This communal interaction proved equally vital to survival as insulated clothing. Another drink for our visitor. Indeed, safe travels to you. The longhouse barriers shielded less against wind than against isolation's terror. Norse people grasped that winter's true battle occurred within human consciousness. Solidarity and shared purpose formed their primary defense. When frozen gales screamed beyond walls, inside maintained organized collective existence. Everyone understood their position and responsibilities. This rigid schedule brought stability amid polar night chaos. Nobody faced cold and darkness alone. The meal is prepared. Join us. Appreciated. That nourishes more than the body. Therefore, the longhouse transcended mere housing. It lived as an organism, a societal vessel transporting inhabitants through the year's harshest, coldest periods. Its genuine secret lay not in construction, but in people. Their existence centered on mutual dependence, where each person's survival required everyone's welfare. This philosophy permeated their societal fabric and architecture. Winter merely amplified this reality, making it tangible. Consequently, defeating winter's first requirement wasn't erecting barriers but forging resilient community. Hearth warmth mattered, yet human connection warmth proved essential. This represented their unconventional strategy. Remember ancient methods, for they anchor us firmly against winter's assault. Our harvest relies on our unity. I'm genuinely curious about your perspective. How critical do you believe community bonding remains for surviving extreme situations today? Share thoughts in comments and subscribe to the channel. To the divine, to forebears, and to ties binding us. Cheers! Are you prepared to learn the reality about Norse construction methods that created self-heating structures? Longhouse design resulted from centuries of careful observation and testing. Every architectural component maximized precious heat retention. Longhouse barriers typically employed post and beam construction with one crucial enhancement. Spaces between timber columns were stuffed with wattle smeared with mud.
The insulation here is thick. It will keep the frost out.
Remarkable insulation characteristics rivaling numerous contemporary materials. It defended against both cold and piercing winds. During winter, this layer accumulated snow, creating additional air pockets that enhanced insulation further. Conventional longhouses featured virtually no window openings. Sole apertures were low, narrow doorways covered with heavy pelts and a smoke opening in the ceiling. This drastically minimized heat escape, though interiors remained very dim. Roofs also received turf coverage, laid atop birch bark waterproofing layers. Such substantial green roofing retained warmth effectively, preventing upward escape. Additionally, its mass made structures more resistant to powerful wind forces. The structure's shape, elongated and narrow, wasn't coincidental. It enabled efficient heat distribution from the central hearth throughout living areas. People and sleeping platforms lined walls, leaving the center for fire and labor. Flooring in longhouses was earthen, often covered with straw or dried grasses. This layer provided extra insulation from frozen ground. Furthermore, it absorbed dampness and was readily replaced when necessary. The stew nears completion. Excellent. The youngsters are starving. Entire construction aimed for maximum air tightness. Low ceilings and small room volumes, excluding the main hall, allowed faster heat.
When will the stew be ready, Father?
Soon, child. It thickens nicely.
And warmth secret hid not in walls, but in garments they wore, fashioned from material with extraordinary characteristics. In the following section, we'll expose Norse wardrobe mysteries. The storm intensifies. Remain near the trail. I'll disclose the most protected secret of Norse clothing, and it involves nothing about horned helmets. Their authentic armor against freezing was apparel, specifically wool. Not the soft processed wool we know, but coarse fatty fabric with nearly mystical properties. The secret was lanolin, natural grease present in sheep fleece. Norse people processed wool minimally, preserving maximum amounts of this compound. Lanolin rendered their garments practically waterproof, which proved critical in damp, frigid climates. Rather than wearing one bulky garment, Norse people employed layering principles. This technique is used today by all manufacturers of extreme condition high-performance clothing. Yet Scandinavians discovered it independently over 1,000 years ago. It's freezing here. Absolutely. Is the vessel prepared for departure? We must leave promptly. The initial layer against skin was typically a linen shirt. Linen absorbs dampness effectively and draws it from the body, keeping skin dry. This mattered because wet skin freezes considerably faster. This pelt will ward off the chill. Ensure your hood is secured, boy. One or more woolen tunics covered the linen shirt. Air layers formed between these garments. This still air warmed by body heat served as the main insulator, not fabric itself. Their invisible armor enabled operation where others could only freeze. The outermost garment was a substantial woolen cloak. It was also saturated with lanolin and defended against wind, rain, and snow. Cloaks were multi-purpose items. By day they protected against weather, by night they functioned as blankets. Feet received equally careful insulation. They wore woolen trousers and...
It is the wool, layered over the linen, that keeps the frost out.
Excessively tight. Loose fitting promoted better air movement and created those insulating air chambers. They intuitively comprehended thermodynamic principles. This clothing system resulted from centuries of harsh climate adaptation. Every element was calculated and functional. Nothing superfluous or random existed in a Norse person's wardrobe. Thus, Norse clothing wasn't merely garment collections but complex engineering systems. It enabled them to remain dry and warm even in most extreme situations. This invisible armor let them function where others could only perish. What I'm about to reveal was the universe's center for every Norse family. See how flames flicker. They recall the ancient deities. Will the deities shield us this winter?
The stew nears readiness.
It's pleasant to finally relax by the flames. What a day.
An open hearth, stretching multiple meters along the structure's central axis. This configuration wasn't accidental, and was exceptionally practical. It allowed heating maximum area, and gave fire access to numerous people simultaneously. All existence revolved around it. Cooking, working, gathering. It's pleasant to finally relax by the flames, and the stew nears readiness. What a day. The Langeld was the primary and often sole light source in the dark longhouse space. Its dancing flame illuminated faces, tools and household objects, creating a unique animated atmosphere. It was a miniature sun during infinite polar night. The sun deserted us that year. Only the Langeld's warmth prevented ice from claiming our spirits. Fuel wasn't always easily obtained in Scandinavia, especially in Iceland's treeless territories. Therefore, Norse people mastered conservation. They used not only timber but also peat, which burned slowly and released substantial heat. Smoke from the hearth rose and exited through a special roof opening located directly above flames. This system was imperfect, and interiors often filled with smoke, but it was acceptable payment for warmth and illumination. The smoke vent design was also carefully considered. It often had a small wooden chimney that could be adjusted to reduce draft and retain more heat inside. It was a simple yet effective ventilation system. Benches surrounded the fire, serving as seats, work surfaces, and beds. At night, people slept as close to the heat source as possible. Cloaks, they covered themselves with captured heat from coals that smoldered throughout the night. Fire also held sacred significance. It was considered holy, connecting human realm with divine realm. Maintaining fire was a critical duty on which the entire community's life depended. Steady now. The flame must never extinguish, for it holds our ancestors' spirits. The extended fire wasn't merely a heat source. It was the home's beating heart, around which all material and spiritual life rotated. It provided sustenance, illumination, warmth, and security feelings. Warmth repels the cold tonight, and the bread is fresh from this morning's baking. But how did they manage the smoke that constantly filled rooms? In the next section, you'll discover how they located food when ground was frozen solid. Survival in winter commences in summer. Norse people understood this truth perfectly, and the entire warm season was dedicated to preparing provisions for long, cold months. Their storage areas were genuine strategic reserves on which life depended. The winter diet's foundation was fish, primarily cod. It was caught in enormous quantities and preserved by drying in open air. The result was a product hard as planks that could be stored for years without losing nutritional value. Meat was also preserved using salt and smoke. Smoking was among the most reliable preservation methods. Smoke not only dehydrated products but also infused them with substances preventing bacterial growth. Dairy products played enormous roles in their diet. Milk was processed into cheese and skyr, a fermented milk product similar to cottage cheese. These products could be stored for extended periods and were important protein and fat sources. Grains such as barley and rye were carefully dried and stored in special pits or chests. They were used to make thick soups and porridges, forming the daily diet's basis. Bread was baked as hard flat bread, which could also be stored for long durations. This porridge nourishes the spirit, doesn't it? The deities have been generous with the harvest. Root vegetables such as turnips, carrots, and onions were stored in cellars or simply buried in ground below frost lines. This allowed them to stay fresh for most of winter. Berries and mushrooms were dried to be used as dish additions. Fats were essential diet parts. Not only did they provide the body with energy needed to generate heat, but they were also used for lighting. Fat was high-calorie fuel for both humans and their lamps. To quench thirst and get extra calories, Norse people brewed beer and ale. These drinks were thick, nutritious, and much safer than water from questionable sources. Winter evenings were often spent with a mug of warming ale. Therefore, although the Norse winter table wasn't particularly diverse, it was well balanced for cold survival. The high protein, fat, and carbohydrate content provided necessary energy. A well-organized food storage system made it possible to survive even the harshest season. What if I showed you how Norse people defeated darkness without a single modern light bulb? Beyond the central hearth providing main light, Scandinavians used simple but effective lamps. These were small stone or clay bowls filled with fat. Fish oil or marine mammal fat served as fuel. A wick made of moss or twisted fabric was placed in the bowl. Such a lamp burned for extended periods, though it gave off dim, smoky light and a specific odor. This light was sufficient for doing small jobs in those house corners not reached by hearth flame. By such lamps' light, women spun and men carved. Every lumen of light was worth its weight in gold. Winter was not a time of laziness, but of hard work. It was a period of indoor labor when everything needed in the next season was created and repaired. Men repaired fishing nets, made axe handles, and sharpened weapons. Women were engaged in textile production, which was one of the most important economic sectors. They combed and spun wool, and then created jewelry.
Odin himself rode Sleipnir through the sky, his spear Gungnir shining brighter than any star.
Hurry before the wind takes it. All right, lift that beam higher. The long dark evenings were a time for stories. Skalds, professional poets, and storytellers were welcome guests in any home. They recited long sagas about deities and heroes, entertaining and educating simultaneously. Beyond sagas, board games such as Honeyfatafar, a strategy game similar to chess, were popular. Archaeologists find game boards and pieces throughout the Scandinavian world. It was an intellectual pastime that brightened the long wait for spring. Music was also part of winter life. Simple instruments such as bone flutes, lyres, and drums accompanied songs and tales. Music and stories supported cultural identity and strengthened social bonds. Thus, Norse people did not simply wait passively for winter to pass. They filled it with meaning, work, and creativity. It was an active struggle against darkness in which craftsmanship, art, and games were their weapons. What do you think the sagas told to raise morale on the darkest nights? In the next section, you'll learn about hygiene practices necessary for survival in cramped quarters. Contrary to popular stereotypes about filthy barbarians, Norse people were surprisingly clean for their era. They understood perfectly well that in the crowded conditions of a longhouse, hygiene was not a luxury but a matter of survival. Disease could spread at lightning speed in a closed community. One of the central elements of their hygiene culture was the bathhouse, or badstuga. It was a small building where stones were heated and water was splashed on to create steam. Steam treatments helped cleanse skin and relax muscles. The bathing ritual was regular, often weekly. It was not only a hygienic procedure but also an important social event. I swear he walked straight out into the snow wearing nothing but the hat. You're joking, I wish I was. Did you hear about the harvest? It seems the deities have been generous this year. The trade route is secure, but the Franks offer better silver, only if we guarantee safe passage through the fjords. People met, socialized, and discussed business in the bathhouse. Archaeologists have found plenty of evidence of their love of cleanliness. Norse graves often contain bone or horn combs, tweezers, and even special sticks for cleaning ears. These items were personal possessions and accompanied their owners even after death. They regularly washed their hair and groomed their beards and mustaches, which were often braided into intricate plaits. The Arab traveler Ibn Fadlan, who encountered Norse people, noted with surprise that they combed their hair daily. They also tried to keep their clothes clean. Woolen items were washed in cold water using urine as an alkaline detergent. Linen was bleached in the sun. Although the interior of the longhouse was smoky and dark, they tried to keep it clean. Old straw was periodically raked from the floor and replaced with fresh straw. This helped to combat debris and unpleasant odor. Of course, their ideas about cleanliness were very different from modern ones. However, compared to many other peoples of that time, Norse people stood out for their concern for their appearance and personal hygiene. This habit
To Odin!
May your Yule be bright!
Hail the harvest!
sunlight, confined space, and constant cold could lead to depression and apathy. Norse people had their own ways of dealing with this invisible enemy. The Yule festival occupied a central place in the winter calendar. It was a major celebration of the winter solstice that lasted several days. It marked a turning point when the days began to grow longer again, bringing hope for the return of spring. During Yule, large feasts were held, sacrifices were made to the deities, and ritual bonfires were lit. It was a time of merriment that dispelled the gloom and despondency. The holiday united the community and gave people emotional release. Their complex mythology also helped them make sense of what was happening. The harsh winter was associated with the world of ice giants, and the return of warmth with the victory of the gods. These stories gave meaning to their struggle and instilled confidence in the ultimate triumph of life. And so the great wolf Fenrir burst his chains, his jaws opening wide enough to swallow the very moon. Belief in fate or weird also played an important role. Norse people believed that their path was predetermined and accepted difficulties as a matter of course. This fatalistic worldview helped them remain steadfast in the face of any trials. Rituals and ceremonies structured time and brought order to the chaos of winter. They marked important moments, gave a sense of control and connection to higher powers. It was psychological support in a world full of uncertainty. Telling sagas by the hearth was not just entertainment. It was a way of passing on knowledge, moral norms, and a sense of pride in one's lineage. Stories about the exploits of ancestors inspired and taught resilience. These scars are not defeats, but the very legends themselves, the glory of our fathers carved in wood and steel. Thus, the psychology of survival was no less important than the physical aspects. Faith, rituals, and a strong sense of community created a powerful mental shield. It protected the Norse mind from the destructive effects of the long, dark winter. Spirits of the flame, winter was not a time of hibernation for Norse people. On the contrary, it was the most intense period of craft activity. The longhouse was transformed into one large workshop, where everyone was busy with important work. Gently now follow the line. Yes, just like that. It was in winter that the fleet was prepared for future voyages. In large longhouses or special boathouses, men repaired the longships damaged during the previous season. They replaced planks, caulked cracks with resin, and prepared the ships for launch. She's ready for the spring. At the same time, work was underway on the weapons. Blacksmiths worked in their workshops, forging new swords, axes, and spearheads. The other warriors sharpened their weapons and repaired their shields and armor. Women's work was no less important. The production of sailcloth was a strategic task, as the speed and maneuverability of ships depended on the sails. Women spun threads and wove hundreds of square meters of durable woolen fabric. Beyond global tasks, everyday tasks were also taken care of. New dishes, spoons, and bowls were carved from wood. Combs, knife handles, and game pieces were made from bone and horn. Children learned crafts by watching the adults work. They helped as best they could, passing knowledge from generation to generation. The winter months were the main school of life for a young Norse person. The cold wind howls, but the fire keeps us safe. Yes, and we must teach the young ones how to keep it burning. This continuous purposeful activity was of great importance. It not only provided the community with everything it needed, but also created a sense of purpose. Each member of the community contributed to the common future. Thus, winter was not the end, but the beginning of a new cycle. It was a time to gather strength, resources, and knowledge. Successful survival in winter guaranteed prosperity in summer. The end of winter was a long-awaited event. The appearance of the first...
The long winter is finally over. Drink up, friends!
We welcome the spring. We welcome the light. With the melting of the snow and the opening of the fjords from the ice, an active phase of life began. Everything that had been done and prepared during the winter now found its use. Prepared ships were launched. It was time for agriculture. The fields were plowed and sown with barley and rye. The harvest determined how well fed the next winter would be. For warriors, the season of campaigns began. Long ships equipped with new sails set off for distant lands for trade or raids. Winter preparations now had to bear fruit. Life spilled out of the cramped longhouses into the open air. People enjoyed the warmth and light they had been deprived of for so long. The rhythm of life changed dramatically, becoming faster and more dynamic. The awakening of nature symbolized the cyclical nature of their world. Norse people lived in harmony with these cycles, subordinating their lives to the changing seasons. Winter was a time of accumulation, and summer was a time of realization. Their ability to survive in extreme conditions was based on this deep understanding of nature. They did not try to conquer it, but learned from it, adapting and using its laws to their advantage. This was the main secret of their resilience. We can see that Norse survival in winter was a complex, multi-layered system. It included unique architecture, well-designed clothing, effective food preparation methods, and most importantly, strong social bonds and psychological resilience. They turned their homes into warm shelters, and the long, dark months into a time of creation and preparation. Their experience proves that human ingenuity and adaptability know no bounds.
The ice giant Ymir sleeps long, but even he must bow to the touch of the sun.
In resilience from the true masters of the North. If you found this fascinating, hit that like button and explore more incredible history on Viking Insight. Suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. Which era or civilization interests you the most? And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our new historical investigations.